I know you're not here by accident. Something about the title pulled you in? Maybe you're a parent, or maybe you've lived with a feeling that something in your family doesn't quite add up. Maybe you've seen a child look at you in a way that feels too distant for comfort. Or maybe, just maybe, you've had a moment where your whole identity as a parent, as a partner, as someone who thought they knew what was real, cracked wide open. If you stay with me till the end, I promise you'll understand what happened the moment my daughter looked at me straight in the eye, blinked twice like she was trying to solve a riddle, and then quietly called me Uncle. Not Dad. Not Daddy. But with a kind of uncomfortable calm, Uncle. And that wasn't even the strangest part. Because 2 days later I found her birth certificate in an old wooden box under our basement stairs, and my name wasn't anywhere on it. Let that sit with you for a second. Imagine being a father, raising a child, kissing skinned knees, wiping tears, hearing your name screamed with joy across the living room, and then one ordinary Tuesday she looks at you like a stranger. Now imagine you search for answers and stumble across a piece of paper that doesn't just shake you, it redefines everything. If you've ever had that creeping feeling that someone in your life might be hiding something, you're not alone. This story isn't just mine anymore. It's for everyone who's ever second-guessed their trust, their reality, or their role in a family they thought was solid. This isn't just a family drama, this is about discovering the kind of truth that burns right through your bones. The kind of truth that doesn't knock. It breaks in. I don't want to waste your time, and I won't tease you with empty suspense. You came here for answers, and I'm going to give you every single one of them by the time we're done. But the story doesn't unravel in a straight line. It loops, it doubles back, and at times, it feels like a maze made by someone who didn't want to be found. I'm inviting you to walk through it with me. You'll see how a single word from a little girl cracked open an entire timeline of lies. You'll meet the people I thought I knew, the woman I married, the family I trusted, and you'll come face to face with the shocking truth buried under layers of silence. So sit with me. Listen close. And hold on, because once this story starts, it does not let go. It all began on a weekend that was supposed to be normal. Just normal. Pancakes, cartoons, and my 7-year-old daughter Grace, still in her pajamas, hair tangled in that adorable way, sitting at the kitchen table humming to herself. It was one of those golden family mornings, where everything felt soft and safe. My wife Lauren had stepped out for a quick Target run. Grace and I were talking about her school art project, the one with the cardboard dinosaurs. I bent down to pick up a crayon that rolled under the table, handed it to her with a smile and said, "For your T-Rex, sweetheart." That's when she looked at me, tilted her head a little, and said, "Thanks, Uncle." At first I laughed. Sounded like a joke. Maybe she'd picked it up from a cartoon. Kids say weird things, right? But she didn't laugh. She didn't even blink. Her eyes stayed locked on mine like she was waiting for a reaction, like she was watching to see if I'd notice. My heart paused for a beat, then sped up. I asked her, "What did you call me?" And she looked confused. Not giggling, not playing. Just confused. "You're Uncle, right? Mom says I stay here with you. But my real dad is in a different place." Real dad. Real dad. Now, before I go any further, I need you to understand something. Grace is my daughter. Or at least I believe that with every ounce of my being. I was there when she was born. I cut the cord. I held her in my arms before Lauren even got to. I was the one who changed the 3 a.m. diapers, who rocked her through fevers, who walked the halls in the dead of night just to get her to sleep. I was the one she ran to when she had a nightmare or when she skinned her knee. I've been there every single step. So what she said, it didn't feel like a joke. It felt like something rehearsed. Like something planted. My hands went cold. I pressed her gently. "Where did you hear that?" She shrugged. "Mom told me not to say anything because it makes you sad." That's the moment I swear something shifted in the air. Like gravity tilted slightly, just enough to make the whole world feel wrong. I didn't even realize I was standing until I heard the chair scrape back. I walked to the living room in a daze, my phone suddenly feeling too heavy in my hand. I didn't call Lauren. I didn't want to panic. Instead, I opened a drawer we hadn't touched in months. The one with old hospital paperwork, extra copies of our mortgage contract, passport photos. I started digging. That's when I found the envelope. Manila. Dusty. Tucked behind a stack of insurance forms. Inside it was Grace's birth certificate. At least I thought it was. But when I opened it, my name, my name, wasn't there. The father field was blank. Just blank. Not even someone else's name. Just an open void. And suddenly that made it feel worse. Like someone hadn't just replaced me, they had erased me. I don't know how long I stood there, just staring at the paper, rereading the details I already knew by heart. Date of birth. Hospital. Wait. Mother's name, Lauren Marie Holloway. But no father listed. None. You ever feel your throat tighten so hard it feels like your lungs forgot how to work? I couldn't breathe. I was shaking, gripping this piece of paper that suddenly felt radioactive. I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe we just never got around to filing it properly. But you know when you're lying to yourself, don't you? Even as you're doing it, something in your gut is screaming the truth. That night, I didn't confront Lauren. I just watched, observed. Her movements felt normal but suddenly too normal. She smiled the same. Said the same bedtime routine lines she always did with grace. But I kept catching moments where her eyes didn't quite meet mine. Like she was hiding behind her own face. I thought I knew every version of my wife. But now I wasn't so sure. And Grace, my sweet girl, was distant. Not in a mean way. Just different. Like someone had told her a story she couldn't unhear. Like she was trying to be careful not to hurt me with something she didn't understand. The next morning, I made an appointment for a DNA test. I didn't tell Lauren. I couldn't. I needed truth before I brought this nuclear bomb into the open. I swabbed Grace's mouth while she slept. Quiet, gentle, trying not to cry. The test results would take a few days. But in those days, the cracks in my life widened like earthquake fault lines. I found things I hadn't noticed before. Pictures moved, dates that didn't add up, a receipt from a hotel I'd never heard of, dated just a few weeks before Lauren and I had even gotten engaged. Everything started to feel staged. A carefully arranged theater performance, and I was the one in the audience watching my own life from behind the curtain. This is where it gets deeper. This is where things start to twist. Because the more I pulled at the thread, the more I realized the story Lauren told me about our beginning wasn't entirely true. Not the timeline. Not the way she accidentally got pregnant. Not even the story of how we met. And that's when I started getting the messages. Anonymous. No number. No return address. Just a sentence each time. First one said, "She isn't yours." Second said, "Ask about Chicago." Third, "He wants to see his daughter." Now you might think this is where I lost it, went full paranoia, started imagining things. But I kept every message. I started tracking timestamps. I started looking through old photo folders, seeing the same man in the background of pictures I swore I took on my own. Tall. Baseball cap. Same shape. Same presence. Always far enough to ignore, until you knew to look. I started seeing ghosts in places I didn't expect them. And just when I thought I had the picture fully forming in my head, just when I was about to confront Lauren and blow the whole thing wide open, Grace said something new. Something that made me question not just the present, but every moment I'd lived since the day she was born. She said, "Daddy number one used to come at night, but Mommy says not to tell you." And that's where everything stopped. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I lay there in bed with Lauren beside me, her breathing slow, rhythmic, too perfect. My eyes traced the ceiling in the dark, counting the rotations of the fan, trying to match them with the racing of my thoughts. I kept hearing Grace's voice in my head. "Daddy number one used to come at night?" It echoed like a whisper from a locked room. I knew I should have woken Lauren up and demanded answers right then, but there was this part of me, this stupid, trembling part, that was scared of what would happen if I did. What if she admitted it? What if everything I'd built, every memory I'd wrapped around our little family, was a lie sculpted into a bedtime story? And worse, what if she denied it with those same familiar eyes and smile, and I had to live with the doubt eating me alive? By morning I'd made up my mind. I was going to track every thread. I couldn't afford to move emotionally anymore. I needed facts, timestamps, evidence. I went to work like nothing was wrong, kissed Grace on the forehead like I always did, and smiled at Lauren over my coffee mug, watching her every move like a stranger in my own kitchen. At my office, I closed my door and opened every cloud backup I could find. Old iClouds, Google Drives, Dropbox accounts, some of which I hadn't touched in years. I needed to rebuild our timeline the way a detective might reconstruct a crime scene. I pulled old texts, scanned through bank records, reviewed photo metadata. If there was a secret in my house, I was going to find where it began. The Chicago message stayed on my mind like a riddle. I remembered vaguely that Lauren had gone there once, early in our relationship, maybe 6 months before we got engaged. She said it was for a friend's bridal shower, something girly and boring that I had no business being curious about. But the timing stood out now. I checked my old email receipts and found a confirmation from a flower delivery service from that same week, something I sent her to the hotel she said she'd be staying at. But the hotel name on my receipt wasn't the one she'd told me. That alone could have been a mix-up, right? Except when I checked the hotel's records, thank God for my friend Thomas who works in hospitality, There were 2 guests staying under her name. One listed as Lauren Holloway. The other, Ed James Rayner. That name meant nothing to me. Not then. But it began to show up. Subtle at first. A comment on one of her old Instagram posts from 2015, "Great smile as always, Al. Jr." A recurring contact in her Venmo transactions back in 2016, "Lunch, James Spaghetti. Always small, casual, easy to overlook. Except once you're looking for a name, it becomes radioactive." I even found a gift tag on one of Grace's old baby shower presents in the attic. It was buried under a stack of keepsakes, but when I flipped it over, it read, "Asterisk for your little light. J.R." Asterisk. I held that card in my hands for what felt like an hour, trying to figure out what it meant. And more importantly, asterisk why asterisk it had been hidden so deep. I confronted Thomas again, got him to pull every record from that hotel's guest logs from that week in Chicago. The dates matched. Lauren and James had checked in the same day. Different rooms. Same floor. 3 nights. 3 unaccounted nights that she never mentioned again. The bridal shower excuse? I texted her friend Rachel to verify. Rachel replied with a picture of the actual bridal party, time-stamped, and Lauren wasn't in it. That's when things started spinning out. Not in a dramatic movie-style unraveling, but in that quiet, methodical way your whole foundation begins to rot out beneath you. I couldn't accuse her yet. I didn't want to tip her off. So instead I started testing her. Dropping hints. Asking about Chicago. Telling her I'd been invited there for a work trip, watching how she stiffened every time I brought it up. She gave me half answers. Chicago's not that fun. It's all business types and tourists. Why would you want to go there? But never once did she ask who I'd be meeting there, or when I'd be leaving. It was like she couldn't handle revisiting it, and maybe she had her reasons. I wanted to believe I was paranoid. I wanted to believe I'd taken Grace's words and built a conspiracy where there wasn't one. But then something else happened. Our neighbor, Danielle, the one with the golden retriever that always pees on our mailbox, stopped me in the driveway. She looked concerned in that subtle, polite way neighbors do when they don't want to get involved but have to. She asked if everything was okay. I told her yes. She hesitated. Then said she noticed a man had been coming around the house in the afternoons. Not me. Taller. Wore a hat. Said he was dropping off something for Lauren. Danielle said she figured it was a contractor or someone helping with party planning. But there hadn't been a party. When I asked Lauren that night about any packages or deliveries, she shrugged. Just the usual stuff, she said. Amazon maybe. But I checked the porch camera later that night, something I hadn't looked at in weeks. There were missing files. Days with no footage. Which is impossible because it auto-records every motion trigger. I went into the router settings and saw that the camera had been manually disconnected and reconnected more than once in the past 2 weeks. Which meant someone knew how to turn off the feed, and knew exactly when to do it. I called the DNA testing center the next morning, even though they said I'd get results by email. I needed answers, needed something I could grip onto. They told me they'd emailed the results the night before. I opened my inbox, shaking, heart pounding against my ribs. There it was, paternity probability, 0.00%. I dropped the phone. Not metaphorically. I dropped it. It hit the kitchen floor and bounced once. I stared at the number on the screen and it didn't feel real. Felt like a glitch. Like the system made a mistake. But it didn't. Grace, my daughter, was not biologically mine. That moment didn't come with thunder or screaming. It came with silence. Cold, paralyzing silence. Because everything that followed that result wasn't just sadness. It was confusion. Fear. Rage. And beneath all of that, asterisk something didn't add up. Asterisk if Lauren had lied about the paternity, if she'd kept that secret for all these years, then why erase the father's name on the certificate? Why leave the blank space? Why raise Grace with me at all? Unless someone else was never supposed to know she existed. I started pulling back into my own memories, trying to remember what Lauren was like in the early weeks after the birth. She was distant then, sure, but I thought it was postpartum depression. What if it wasn't? What if she wasn't adjusting to motherhood, but to a secret that was constantly threatening to surface? What if James Rayner, if he was the biological father, didn't know about Grace? Or worse, what if he did and Lauren had done everything in her power to keep him away? The questions spiraled and the possibilities darkened. What if he wasn't just someone she used to know? What if he wasn't safe? What if Lauren wasn't keeping secrets to protect herself, but to protect us? Or was I the one who had unknowingly stepped into someone else's story? What if I was the interloper? The stand-in? And then, right in the thick of that storm, something truly unexplainable happened. I got a letter. A real one. No return address. Inside was a photo, aged, faded, clearly taken years ago. In it, Lauren was holding a newborn. But it wasn't in a hospital room. It looked like a small apartment. And standing beside her, his face partially cut off by the frame, was James Rayner. The caption on the back said only, she was never yours to lose. I didn't know if it was a threat, a confession, or a warning. But I knew one thing in that moment. This wasn't just about a lie. This was about ownership, identity, history. Someone was rewriting the story of my family from behind the scenes, and I was just starting to read the parts they never wanted me to find. And Grace, sweet, innocent Grace, was beginning to remember things I never knew she'd seen. I was still holding that photo in my hand when I realized how badly my fingers were trembling. It wasn't the picture itself. It was the feeling that whoever had sent it had been watching me long enough to know exactly when to send it. The handwriting on the back was neat, deliberate, almost formal. It didn't look like Lauren's. I studied every curve of the letters trying to place it, but nothing clicked. I thought about taking it to someone, maybe a private investigator, maybe even the police, but how do you explain a mystery that you're only halfway sure is even real? There was no direct threat. Just a message. A cruel reminder. She was never yours to lose. And for a terrifying moment, I wondered if they were right. If I'd just been living in someone else's life all along. But things didn't just stall there, they got worse. 2 days after I got that letter, I went to find the birth certificate again, thinking maybe I'd missed something, a seal, a note, anything. But it was gone. I tore through the drawer where I'd kept it, then the basement, then the entire house. Nothing. Not even the envelope. I asked Lauren if she'd seen it, keeping my voice calm, trying not to let my panic bleed through. She looked confused, genuinely confused, and said, "I haven't touched that stuff in years. Why are you looking for it now?" But it was the way she said it that struck me. Not, "What certificate?" Not, "What are you talking about?" Just a rehearsed kind of innocence. Like she'd been preparing for this moment and wasn't sure if it had come too soon. That night, I checked the camera logs again, even though I knew what I'd find. The feed had been cut for a 2-hour window the day before. Same as last time. Someone knew when to come. And someone knew exactly what to take. I changed the password. I set up backup storage. But deep down I realized I was chasing a ghost. Someone had access to my home, either through Lauren or around her, and they were always one step ahead. I was barely sleeping by then, barely eating. At work I was distracted. At home I was paranoid. I found myself watching Grace more closely, not because I suspected her, but because I kept wondering what she knew and what she'd been told to forget. Kids don't fake memories, not like this. And her drawings were starting to get stranger. One night, I found a picture she'd drawn in her bedroom. A house with 2 stick figures standing far apart. One labeled "Me and Daddy." The other labeled "Other Man." When I asked her who the other man was, she just said, "He used to come in the dark, but Mommy said he went away." That line nearly stopped my heart. I asked her what he looked like. She shrugged. "I don't remember his face. Just his hat. And he smelled like the backyard after it rains." I stared at her, trying not to cry. Because as much as it terrified me to think of who that man might have been, it terrified me more to imagine what she might have seen, or what Lauren might have hidden. And then, as if to twist the knife deeper, Grace leaned close and whispered, "I don't think he likes you." I started pulling away from Lauren emotionally, though she didn't seem to notice, or maybe she did and she was pretending not to. The tension between us was quiet, thick, like fog. We didn't argue. We didn't confront. We just coexisted, passing each other like strangers in our own kitchen. I knew I had to do something. I needed more information. That's when I decided to reach out to someone who might know more than she let on. Lauren's sister, Emily. Emily and I had always had a cool relationship. Cordial. Distant. Like she was always holding back, keeping some inside joke to herself. I hadn't seen her in over a year, since Grace's 6th birthday party where she showed up late, stayed for 20 minutes, then vanished without even saying goodbye. But something about her always felt off. Too polite. Too careful. Like she knew something she wasn't allowed to say. I found her number buried in an old contacts list and sent a simple message. "Can we talk? I need to ask you about Lauren." She replied within minutes. "I was wondering when you'd reach out." That alone made my stomach turn. We met at a park 2 towns over, away from eyes, away from anything familiar. She looked thinner than I remembered, nervous. Kept checking over her shoulder like she'd been followed. And when I told her what I'd discovered so far, Grace's strange comments, The missing name on the certificate, the photo of Lauren with James, she didn't act surprised. Not at all. She just sighed, rubbed her eyes and said, "I tried to warn her. I told her this would catch up eventually." That's when she told me about a weekend, back when Lauren and I had just started dating, when Lauren disappeared. Not a vacation. Not a party. Just gone. Her parents thought she was traveling with friends, but Emily said she came back with bruises, more quiet than usual, and wouldn't talk to anyone for days. She wouldn't say where she went. But Emily was sure she'd gone to Chicago. And she was sure James was involved. Lauren and James weren't just a fling, she said quietly. It was messy. Controlling. He wasn't the type to let go. I think when she found out she was pregnant, she panicked. You were her way out. I felt sick hearing that. Like I'd been picked, not loved. Like I'd been cast in a role I never auditioned for. But before I could ask anything else, Emily grabbed my arm and looked me dead in the eyes. You need to stop. Whoever sent you that photo isn't trying to scare you. They're warning you. There are things Lauren still won't say out loud. If you keep pushing, you might find out something you can't take back. Her words clung to me the whole way home. That was the first time someone actually told me to stop. Not out of denial. Out of fear, but I wasn't about to back off. Not when Grace was at the center of all of it. So I dug deeper. I searched James Rayner's name online, trying to piece together who he really was. Most results were dead ends, old social media, public records, but one news article stood out. Dated 2018. A fire at a storage unit facility in Indiana. Dozens of personal belongings destroyed. The article listed victims who had rented units, and one of them was James. A witness mentioned that he'd been seen arguing with a woman in the parking lot hours before the fire began. A woman with red hair. Just like Lauren had back then. That couldn't be a coincidence. And as I stared at the pixelated surveillance image attached to the article, my blood ran cold. The timestamp on the photo was 2 weeks before Grace was born. If Lauren had gone there to meet him, if something had happened that night, and then she returned to me, pregnant and silent, what else had she buried in the ashes? But the twist came later that night when I went to check the image again. The article was gone. The entire news site redirected to a page not found error. I searched through archives, tried the Wayback Machine. Nothing. It was like it had been erased. Someone didn't want me finding the past. And that's when I realized, someone wasn't just watching me. They were editing the truth before I could reach it. By the next morning, paranoia had taken root like a disease in my bones. I couldn't shake the feeling that every step I took, every search I made, every conversation I had was being watched or scrubbed clean behind me. That missing article wasn't just inconvenient, it was deliberate. I'd seen it with my own eyes, saved the link, bookmarked the page. There was no logical explanation for its sudden disappearance unless someone had access, real access, to remove or overwrite records. And that wasn't something your average jilted ex or scorned lover could pull off. Someone was pulling strings behind the scenes, someone with a motive to keep this story buried. But it wasn't until I got the call from my brother Tyler that I realized how deep this really went, and how fast it was spreading. Tyler and I hadn't talked much in recent years. We weren't estranged, just drifting apart the way people do when marriages, jobs, and kids stretch life in different directions. But when he called that day, his voice was tight, shaken in a way I hadn't heard since our dad's funeral. He asked me if everything was okay. I said no, not remotely. He paused, then asked me something that nearly knocked the wind out of me. Did you get a photo too? That sentence hit harder than the DNA test ever could. Because it meant this wasn't just about me anymore. Someone else, someone connected to me, had been pulled into the shadows. I asked him what kind of photo, trying not to give too much away. He said it was mailed to his office. No return address, no note, just a picture of Lauren. Pregnant. Standing outside a clinic in a different city years ago. She looked afraid. Tired. Alone. And scrawled in thick black ink across the bottom of the photo were 5 chilling words. Asterisk, does he know the truth? Asterisk. Tyler had no idea what it meant, thought maybe it was some prank or extortion scam, until he remembered I'd mentioned Grace acting strange during one of our last catch-up texts. That's when the fear set in and he called me. When I told him what I'd discovered, about the birth certificate, the DNA test, James Rayner, the erased records, he went silent. Then he said, "Bro, you need to be careful. If this is the kind of thing that people are willing to erase history for, they might not stop at just creeping around. You might be in deeper than you think." And I knew he was right. Because something about this was bigger than paternity. Bigger than infidelity. It felt coordinated. Like Lauren had been part of something before me, something dangerous, something protected. But the more I pressed forward, the less solid the ground beneath me felt. The evidence I'd collected little by little began vanishing. The photo from the letter? Gone. I'd put it in my desk drawer under lock, and when I opened it that morning, all that was left was the envelope. No picture. No message. The copy of the DNA results? Corrupted when I tried to print them, and the email itself deleted from my inbox, and even the recovery folder. It was as if every piece of proof was disintegrating the moment I found it. I started backing things up to encrypted drives, sending copies to burner emails, even mailing a few files to a friend of mine in cybersecurity, just in case I disappeared, or worse. But it wasn't just the digital trail being scrubbed clean. People around me started acting differently, like they were being watched too. Danielle, our neighbor who'd mentioned the man visiting Lauren, suddenly refused to talk about it when I brought it up again. She looked nervous, eyes darting toward her Ring camera, and just said, "I think I made a mistake. You should talk to Lauren." Then she shut her door. I hadn't even asked a question yet. At this point, the tension in the house was unbearable. Lauren had become more attentive in this strange, artificial way, making my favorite meals, texting me during the day, leaving notes on the fridge like she used to when we first got married. But none of it felt real. It felt like she knew something was slipping and she was trying to patch it before I pulled it apart completely. Grace, meanwhile, had started sleepwalking again, something she hadn't done since she was 4. I found her standing in the hallway at 3 a.m. one night, facing the wall, whispering something I couldn't quite hear. When I crouched down and touched her shoulder, she turned slowly and said, "He's watching from the trees again. Mommy said don't look." And then she went limp in my arms, like the memory had drained her. I didn't sleep a second after that. I needed answers fast. And I knew there was one place I hadn't looked yet, Lauren's old storage unit. I remembered her mentioning it once years ago when we moved into our current house. She said it just had old college stuff, winter clothes, and baby things we didn't need anymore. But the receipt in one of our old tax folders told a different story. It was a high-security facility 2 counties over. Private units. Number 24-hour access. And most importantly, still active. That meant she'd been paying for it all these years. Even now. I drove out there the next day while she was at work. I used the access code from the receipt, praying it hadn't changed. Miraculously, it hadn't. The keypad blinked green, and the metal door rolled open with a loud, reluctant groan. Inside was a time capsule of another life. Boxes labeled with years I didn't recognize, photos and frames I'd never seen before, and a large black plastic tub in the back corner marked asterisk, keep hidden. Asterisk. My hands shook as I opened it, heart hammering. Inside were folders, old medical records, ultrasound printouts that didn't match Grace's birth date, and something far worse. A document stamped with the words Family Services, Protective Custody Case File. I barely had time to register what I was reading before my phone buzzed in my pocket. A new message. Blocked number. Just 5 words again. Asterisk, that's not your daughter. Asterisk. I dropped everything and ran. I don't even remember locking the unit behind me. I just knew someone had been tracking my every move, and if they were still watching, I wasn't safe. Neither was Grace. When I got back home, Lauren was already there. She didn't ask where I'd been. She just looked at me and said, "You shouldn't have opened that box." That was the first time her voice didn't shake. That was the first time I saw fear leave her eyes completely. Which made me realize she wasn't scared anymore. She was waiting. I don't remember how long I stood in the kitchen after Lauren said that. Asterisk, you shouldn't have opened that box. Asterisk. Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't even cold. It was something far more unsettling, resigned. Like someone who'd finally accepted that the mask could no longer stay on. I looked at her, and for the first time since all of this began, I didn't recognize the woman standing in front of me. Her face was familiar, yes, but the energy behind it, the way she carried herself, had shifted. There was no trace of panic in her posture. No stuttering, no nervous lip biting, no guilty body language. She stood tall, almost calm, like someone who had trained themselves for the moment their secrets would surface. And that terrified me more than anything else. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to demand answers, to grab her shoulders and shake the truth out of her. But I didn't. Because something in my gut screamed at me to play dumb, just a little longer. I couldn't risk tipping her off now, not without understanding the full extent of what I was involved in. So I nodded slowly, pretending I didn't know what box she meant, muttering something about needing to lie down. And I did lie down, for exactly 5 minutes, before I slipped out of bed, locked myself in the garage, and opened the file I had stashed in my glove compartment before driving home. The case file from Family Services. I unfolded each brittle yellowing page with trembling hands. There, under the heading Child Protective Services or Redacted Placement, was a name I hadn't seen before. Isabel Grace Rayner. Grace's real name. I sat there in that garage breathing like I'd run a mile uphill. My daughter had been living under a false identity. Not just an error on a birth certificate. This was deliberate. Someone had changed her name, hidden her birth history, and placed her in our care under layers of false paperwork. And it wasn't just Lauren's doing. This had official state signatures sealed by court orders, names blacked out, addresses whited over, like it had all been scrubbed before being quietly buried. But why? Who or what were they hiding her from? I barely slept that night. Every creak of the floorboards made my stomach tighten. Every passing car outside the window made me inch toward the blinds. I kept Grace's door cracked open, just enough to hear her soft breathing as she slept. That sound, steady, innocent, was the only thing anchoring me to any sense of peace. But my mind was already unraveling, reeling through every memory with new eyes. I remembered her odd reactions to certain noises, her aversion to dark basements, how she always froze when she heard a man's voice she didn't recognize. These weren't quirks. These were responses. Conditioned reactions from a past she couldn't articulate. Or one she had been told never to speak of. The next morning, everything shattered. I walked into Grace's room at 6:30 a.m., same as I did every school day. Her bed was made. Her toys untouched. No little socks on the floor, no pajamas tossed over the edge of the hamper. It was like she'd never slept there at all. I checked the bathroom. Empty. My throat dried up. I called her name once, twice. Then louder, full voice, panic rising in my chest. No answer. I ran to Lauren, shaking her awake. She sat up slowly, blinking, then frowned as if I'd interrupted a dream. "She's probably in the backyard," she mumbled. But I'd already checked. I ran outside barefoot, scanning every corner of the yard, every bush, every inch of the property, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. That's when I noticed the gate was open. I sprinted to the street. No cars. No neighbors outside. No sign of movement. I called her name until my voice cracked. When I turned around, Lauren was standing in the doorway, arms folded across her chest, watching. Her face unreadable. I yelled at her, "Where is she? What did you do?" And she didn't flinch. She just said, "You were never supposed to find that file. You should have let it go." My vision blurred. My hands shook. I felt like I was about to throw up. I called the police. Reported Grace as missing. They showed up within 20 minutes, asked all the expected questions. But Lauren was calm, polished, even helpful. She told them we'd had a small disagreement lately, nothing serious, and that Grace often wandered into the neighbor's yard or to the end of the cul-de-sac when she woke up early. She smiled while she said it. Like this was just a minor family hiccup. And I saw how easily they believed her. I saw how neatly she fit the narrative. Loving mother. Panicked husband. No prior history. No signs of violence or distress. The officers were polite but brief. They said they'd canvass the area, keep patrols posted, call if anything turned up. And then they left. Just like that. I stood in the living room, staring at the closed door, and realized I was utterly alone. Until my phone rang again. It was Tyler. His voice was frantic, not like before. This time he was shaking. He said someone had broken into his apartment. Not robbed it. Not vandalized it. Just broke in and took a single box of old family photos from our childhood storage closet. Nothing else touched. Not a single fingerprint left behind. And on his kitchen counter they'd left something behind. A printout of the same family services case file I had found, with a new message scrawled across the top in blood red ink. Asterisk, stop digging. Or next time it won't be a photo. Asterisk. We were being hunted. That much was now clear. This wasn't a passive warning anymore. This was personal. Someone was watching our every move, manipulating not just what we saw, but what we were allowed to remember. I hung up and turned to confront Lauren again, but she was gone. Her car. Her phone. Everything. Just gone. And in her place, taped to the refrigerator, was one final note. It read, asterisk, she's safer without you. Don't try to find us. Asterisk. I stood there for a long time, reading those 9 words over and over, until they stopped making sense. Until the tears finally came, slow and silent, the kind that don't ask for attention. My daughter was gone. My wife, if she ever really was my wife, had vanished. And everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, my identity had shattered like glass underfoot. But the worst part wasn't the confusion or even the betrayal. It was knowing with complete certainty that this was just the beginning. Because somewhere in the ashes of that buried past, someone was pulling the strings, and they weren't done with me yet. I drove for hours. No direction, no plan. Just highways and backroads blurring past as the sun rose and the sky turned from black to bruised purple. I couldn't go home, not with Lauren and Grace gone. I couldn't go to the police either, not when the last time they'd looked at me like I was the unstable one, the overreacting parent trying to pin his own paranoia on an innocent situation. The case file sat in the passenger seat, half folded, the edges warped from my grip. I kept reading the same sentence over and over again like I'd missed something, like the truth was buried between the lines. I needed answers, and there was only one place left to start. Someone from that list of redacted names. Someone real. Someone who had signed off on whatever this was. And by some strange miracle, or cruel design, one name wasn't blacked out. D. Harrow. I drove to the nearest library that still had public records on microfilm and dug through hours of archived licensing data. The name eventually came up under Child Welfare Administration. Last known employment was at a group home that had since been shut down following a string of unsolved abuse claims and staff suicides. I found the address anyway. Old property upstate. Abandoned now according to the record. But I didn't care. I needed to see it. Smell the walls. Stand in whatever room Grace might have once stood in. So I went. Took the long drive into a fog-covered countryside and pulled up to the rotted remains of a 3-story brick building wrapped in vines and broken glass. The sign out front was barely legible, the letters faded to ghosts. Everpine House for Children. Inside the place was dead. Floors covered in dust, windows boarded up from the inside. But the strange thing? There were no signs of vandalism. No graffiti. No empty beer bottles or trash piles. Like the place hadn't been abandoned, just sealed away. Preserved. I walked slowly, listening for rats, squatters, anything. I called Grace's name once. Just to hear it echo. Then I found the records room. Rusted filing cabinets, some bent from years of moisture damage, but one, just one asterisk, was locked tight and untouched. I cracked it open with a tire iron I'd brought in from the trunk, and there they were, dozens of old files, photographs, intake forms, medical charts, all dated between 2008 and 2014. I flipped through one after the next until I landed on a small yellowed folder labeled subject R6. The photo clipped to the inside made my blood run cold. It was Grace. Younger. Maybe 4 years old. Shorter hair. Eyes slightly hollow. But unmistakably her. And the report wasn't a family placement form, it was an observation log. They had been studying her. Monitoring her behavior, collecting responses to specific stimuli, tracking everything from sleep cycles to language development to interactions with non-existent individuals. One section, dated October 17, 2012, read, subject R6 continues to describe recurring visitations by a woman in the mirror, always following nights where subject is exposed to family photographs. No identifiable source of hallucination found. Recommendation, continued memory suppression therapy. My hands trembled. I nearly dropped the folder. They weren't protecting her from someone. They were protecting others from her. I left that building with 1,000 questions buzzing in my skull and the horrifying suspicion that the lie wasn't just who Grace was, it was what she had the capacity to remember. I hadn't even closed the driver's side door when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered it. The voice on the other end was calm, emotionless. A woman. You were warned not to go digging. I tried to speak but she cut me off. You opened a door that was closed for a reason. What your daughter saw, what she is, it was never supposed to survive past Everpine. I asked where Grace was, demanded it. The line went silent for a moment. Then she said something that changed everything. She was never yours to begin with. I sat there in stunned silence, heart racing, breath shallow. I managed to ask her name. And when she said it, I felt the ground shift under me. Dr. Isabel Grace Rayner. It hit me like a truck. Grace wasn't named after anyone. She was someone. Someone who'd been part of the research. Someone who, after the closure of Everpine, had her identity completely wiped. And the name I'd assumed was given to her as a child wasn't a birth name, it was an alias built from her real one, reshaped so no one would connect the dots. But somehow, through cracks in the system or a last-minute decision by someone on the inside, she had ended up in our home. Our perfect little family had been built around a ghost. And Lauren? The woman who stood by my side through every doctor's visit, every meltdown, every sleepless night? She used to work at Everpine. It was in one of the employment forms I had overlooked. The name L. Merritt scribbled in the margins, cross-checked with a residential staff logbook. Not a therapist. Not a nurse. She was a memory integration specialist. Her entire job had been to implant benign narratives into damaged children's minds. She didn't adopt Grace by accident. She was assigned to her. Me. I was just collateral. A background actor to make the family appear authentic. And now, the second Grace's suppressed memories had started bleeding through, via the photograph, the drawings, the whispers at night, they'd activated the escape plan. Removed her. Cut me out. Clean. Surgical. But what they didn't count on was this. I had already seen too much. And I wasn't going to stop. That night, I broke into Lauren's old laptop. It took hours of guesswork, cycling through password hints and recovery questions until finally, I got in. Most files were routine, innocuous. Budget spreadsheets, appointment logs, parenting PDFs. But in a hidden folder disguised as a photo album was a video. It was dated 2 years before we adopted Grace. And it showed a small, windowless room with a mirrored wall. A little girl, Grace, unmistakably younger, sat at a table, clutching a doll. She stared at the mirror for a long time. Then, softly, without moving her lips, she whispered something. I couldn't hear the first few seconds, but then her voice grew louder. She said, "She's behind the glass. She's always behind the glass." Then she stood up, walked to the mirror, and placed her tiny hand against it. She smiled. And then, in a voice not her own, lower, deeper, she said, "She remembers now." The screen went black. And I knew in that moment that everything I thought I was protecting her from, she had already unleashed. I don't know where they've taken her. I don't know who they really are. But I know this story isn't about a missing child anymore. It's about a memory they tried to erase. A truth they buried so deep it started to rot. And now that it's resurfacing, they're scrambling to contain it. But it's too late. Because she remembers. And so do I. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw Grace's face pressed to that mirror, whispering with a voice that didn't belong in her throat. I saw Lauren, Noel, Merritt, standing beside me in the kitchen, humming as she stirred oatmeal, smiling like she hadn't constructed an entire life out of lies. The betrayal didn't just feel personal, it felt like my reality had been carved open and something unspeakable had crawled out from beneath it. But what haunted me the most wasn't the deception. It was the possibility that my daughter, the girl I'd tucked into bed, read bedtime stories to, held through storms and night terrors, might have never been just a little girl. And now she was missing. Vanished. And the people who had taken her had left no ransom note, just warnings, surveillance, and a trail of buried evidence that painted her not as a victim but a threat. By the next morning, I knew I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. I drove straight to my brother Mark's place. He was a former cybersecurity analyst for the Department of Defense, now freelancing in tech infrastructure. If anyone could help me track the encrypted origin of that call, maybe even backtrace the Everpine records, it was him. But when I got there, something was off. His blinds were closed. His car was parked awkwardly, door slightly open. I approached slowly, my heartbeat thudding so loudly I thought I'd hear it echo. The front door wasn't just unlocked, it was open. Inside, the living room was ransacked, not in the chaotic, wild way of a robbery, but in the calculated, targeted manner of a sweep. Every hard drive, every external storage unit, every laptop, gone. Only his phone remained, still powered on, vibrating against the floor with a new text every few seconds. They weren't random. They were commands. A string of codes, IP addresses, and one clear sentence repeated at the bottom of every message. Terminate connection. He's been compromised. That's when I heard the creak of the back door. I turned, ready to defend myself, only to come face to face with Mark. Pale, sweating, shaking as he raised his hands slowly. "They were here," he whispered. "They said if I helped you they'd erase everything. My identity, my savings, my freedom. I'd be flagged, blacklisted, disappeared. Just like her." I tried to convince him, to tell him we couldn't stop now, but he interrupted me with a look I'd never seen on his face before, terror. "They showed me video feeds," he said. "Of Grace. Of you. Of what she can do." I begged him to explain. He wouldn't. Or maybe he couldn't. "They're not protecting secrets," he finally said. "They're protecting reality. They've built the world around certain absences. Certain things that must not be remembered. And she broke something open. That's when he handed me a drive. Said it was the only thing he could salvage before they wiped everything else. You don't want to know what's on it," he said. "But you need to." I left. Not because I didn't care, but because I couldn't risk them catching up to me while I had that drive. I drove until I was out of city limits, pulled into a forgotten motel off Highway 40, and plugged the drive into a burner laptop. At first it was just noise. Scrambled video frames, corrupted audio files, medical logs from Everpine tagged with red warning banners. But then came the footage, hidden deep in a folder named *null echo. It was from a surveillance camera inside our own home. The angle was from inside Grace's room. The timestamp? From 2 months ago, long before I even knew anything was wrong. It showed Grace sleeping. Peacefully. But then her eyes opened. Fully alert. Not groggy. Not frightened. Just aware. She sat up, looked directly at the camera, like she knew it was their and said, "He thinks I'm dreaming." I slammed the laptop shut, heart punching the inside of my chest. I needed answers. And there was only one person left who might give them to me willingly, Lauren. I tracked her down to a rented cottage outside Sedona, registered under a fake name, paid in cash. Remote, desolate, no cell reception. I knew if I walked through that door, I might not walk out again. But I had to know. I had to see if she was still the woman I married, or just another handler in a well-rehearsed script. When she opened the door, she didn't act surprised. "You found me," she said softly. No anger. No panic. Just sadness. Inside the place was sterile. No pictures. No signs of life. Just a single bag packed on the counter and a flight confirmation on the table. One way, no return. I confronted her, laid everything out. The records. The research. The footage. And she didn't deny a single part of it. She was never supposed to be placed in a civilian home, she told me. Her memory suppression had failed before. But when the program was dissolved, there were too many loose ends. So we rehomed her. Monitored from a distance. She was stable for years. Until she started remembering. I asked her what they were so afraid of. Why go to such lengths to control a child? She hesitated, then whispered, "Because Grace doesn't just remember her past. She remembers other people's. Events that never happened. Accidents that were erased. People who never existed, until she says their name. And then they come back." I told her I didn't care. That I would protect Grace no matter what. And then she gave me the ultimatum. "There's a way to wipe it all," she said. "You, me, the memories, the records, everything. They're offering you an out. One injection. One signature. You go back to a version of life where Grace never existed. Where you never suffered. You wake up tomorrow happy. Safe. Free. Or, you chase the truth. And if you do that, you'll be hunted like her. Forever." I stared at her, disbelief choking me. "You really think I would abandon my daughter?" "She's not your daughter," Lauren said softly. "She never was." And yet, the weight in her eyes told me she didn't believe that either. I stood at that crossroads, heartbeat thundering like a war drum. Take the easy way out and lose everything I knew I'd ever loved, or hold on to the one thing that still felt real and risk everything I had left. And I still hadn't decided. Because the worst part wasn't choosing between truth and safety. It was knowing that Grace, wherever she was, might already be choosing for me. The motel room had gone cold, despite the desert heat outside pressing against the windows like a living thing. I sat with the drive still clenched in my hand, laptop open beside me but untouched, the screen gone to sleep long ago. I couldn't move, not really. My body was frozen between choices, but my mind was sprinting through every conversation I'd had with Lauren, every moment with Grace, every flicker of doubt that I'd shoved aside. I kept thinking, how long have they been watching us? Not just us, maybe not just Grace, but others. Families. Entire lives twisted and folded into someone else's idea of safety. And if Lauren's offer was real, if there truly was a way to erase it all, then who else had already taken that deal? How many people around me had forgotten entire lives and never knew it? I didn't have long to sit in that spiral. Just after midnight, a text came through on the burner. She's in Flagstaff. If you want her, come alone. No police. No backup. And no more questions. It was unsigned, but the embedded coordinates were from someone who had eyes on both me and Grace. I knew it wasn't a rescue. It was a warning. And a trap. But I couldn't risk waiting. I couldn't risk hesitating. The address led me to an abandoned train depot tucked behind a scrapyard, long swallowed by weeds and silence. I parked far out of sight and approached on foot, heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted to escape before I got too close. The moment I stepped inside, I heard it, a faint humming, not mechanical but electrical, as if the air itself was charged with a secret it was dying to spill. I crept through rusted gates and shattered glass until I reached the central terminal. And there she was, Grace, strapped into a chair beneath an array of medical monitors and cables, her head fitted with something that looked like a halo made of wires. Her eyes were open, but they weren't blinking. Before I could move, a voice crackled behind me. I warned you. You should have taken me out. I turned and saw Mark, my brother. He stepped forward slowly, a device in his hand that looked like a modified remote detonator, but sleeker, newer, government-designed, no doubt. They offered you the clean exit, he said almost apologetically. But you always had to dig. Always had to know. He looked older than I remembered, like the weight of what he was about to do had aged him in minutes. I didn't want to lie to you, he added. But they came to me before they came to her. When Grace was placed in your home, I was assigned to monitor her integration. You think your daughter's school records, those pediatrician visits, even her art competitions happened organically? I approved every one of them. I staggered backward, my knees nearly giving out. Why? I choked out. Why her? Why us? Because she doesn't belong in any single timeline, he said. She's an anomaly, something that fell through a crack when they started experimenting with reality layering and collective memory implants. They call her a nexus breach. Every time she remembers something she shouldn't, it rewrites us. Do you understand that? You think you're chasing the truth, but you don't even know what reality you're living in anymore. She keeps changing it. And then it hit me. That's why everything had started to feel off. Why I kept remembering things that didn't match the world around me. Why neighbors looked at me like they knew me on Monday and then barely nodded on Friday. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't stress. It was leakage, fractures in the timeline. Revisions made not by machines or scientists, but by Grace's memories. Mark raised the device. We have to reset her before it gets worse. Before we lose everything. You don't understand the scale. Whole towns have vanished overnight. People report children that never existed, siblings that disappear mid-sentence. It's not just about her. It's about containment. I don't care, I said. She's my daughter. Asterisk, she's everyone's daughter, asterisk, he whispered. That's the problem. Suddenly, alarms started blaring from the side panels. The screens next to Grace began to flash violently. She was awake, fully. She turned her head slowly, not toward Mark, not toward me, but toward the ceiling, like she could feel something above us shifting. And then the lights blew out. Darkness swallowed the room, followed by a concussive pulse that knocked us both to the ground. The wiring from Grace's chair snapped free and slithered across the floor like severed nerves. Then she stood up, asterisk on her own. Asterisk, no stumbling. No weakness. Her eyes were glowing faintly, not with any unnatural color, but with recognition. She knew where she was. She knew what they were trying to do. And then she said the name of a town. A town that doesn't exist on any map anymore. A town I only remembered from a dream I had as a child. When I died in. The air changed. Mark screamed. And the depot began to collapse, not physically but in memory, peeling away at the edges like a forgotten photograph. I ran to Grace, picked her up, felt her heartbeat against mine. Daddy, she whispered, I remembered too much. As we ran from the depot, the world behind us twisted like a corrupted video feed, skipping frames, resetting structures, turning steel into fog. I knew then that this wasn't just about saving her anymore. It was about deciding what version of the world I wanted to live in. One built on truths no one could bear, or one rewritten by the mind of a child who only ever wanted to go home. But if we kept running, there would be no more hiding. No more safe houses. No more quiet lives. We weren't escaping the program anymore. We were rewriting it. The desert night had settled around us like a shroud as Grace and I fled the collapsing depot, her small hand gripping mine tighter with each uncertain step. The world behind us wasn't just crumbling, it was rewriting itself, as if reality itself was a patchwork quilt being torn apart and sewn back together by invisible hands. Every breath I took was weighed down by the knowledge that this was no longer a game of hide and seek. This was the final reckoning, the moment where all the tangled threads of truth, lies and memory would snap or weave a new pattern forever. My mind raced through everything I'd learned, every lie Lauren, *L, Merritt *, had told me, every cryptic message from shadowy figures warning me to stop. But the real shocker was still ahead. Because when we reached the outskirts of the town, the place Grace had whispered, the empty streets felt less like abandonment and more like a carefully staged set. Every light too still, every shadow too measured, every breeze too quiet. I knew they were waiting. They had to be. But what I didn't expect was the figure that emerged from the shadows before any words were spoken. It wasn't some faceless government agent, nor the clinical Dr. Harrow I'd once tried to track down. No, it was Lauren. Not the woman I'd loved, but her, the architect of Grace's erased past, the silent puppeteer of a fabricated family. She stepped forward with a calm so cold it was like frostbite on my skin. "You shouldn't have come here," she said softly, voice carrying the weight of 1,000 buried secrets. But I suppose it was inevitable. The tension in the air was electric as she gestured behind her, and I saw them, dozens of people, all connected by the same fractured memories, the same patched-together realities. Faces I recognized but also didn't, neighbors, friends, strangers who should have been ghosts, but were very much alive, tangled in the program Grace had begun to unravel. "This isn't just about her," Lauren said, eyes glinting with a mixture of fear and resolve. "It's about the future of all of us. Memories are the foundation of identity. If she rewrites them, she reshapes our entire existence. We can't let that happen." I looked down at Grace, whose gaze was steady, fierce. "But she remembers the truth," I said, voice shaking but determined. "You tried to bury her past, rewrite her mind, and even erase her. But memories aren't just data to be deleted. They're who we are. She's fighting to be free." Lauren shook her head, stepping closer, and for the first time I saw cracks in her facade, the burden of the lies she carried. "I loved her too," she whispered, voice breaking. "But the cost is too high. If we lose control, chaos will reign. We must end this." Suddenly, everything spiraled into chaos. The people around us activated devices I hadn't seen until that moment. Small emitters pulsing with blue light, designed to suppress Grace's memory resurgence. The air was thick with tension as the devices began to hum, trying to pull her back into the shadows of forgetfulness. I acted instinctively, throwing myself between Grace and the glow, shouting her name, trying to anchor her to our reality. Her eyes met mine, filled with raw emotion, fear, defiance, love. She whispered, "Daddy, I'm scared. But I won't let them erase me." The battle was no longer physical but psychological, a war fought in the labyrinth of the mind. Lauren's voice echoed, trying to break through, to calm Grace, to convince her that forgetting was salvation. But Grace's memory burned brighter, fracturing the silence with flashes of faces, places, and truths that no one had wanted to see again. It was as if the very fabric of our world trembled under the weight of her remembering. In that moment, I realized the true villain wasn't a person, but the fear of truth itself. The desperate attempt to control memories to maintain order. And Grace was the spark of rebellion, the living proof that identity couldn't be rewritten by others without a fight. Just when I thought the struggle couldn't get any more intense, Lauren collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "You don't understand," she sobbed. "There's something worse than memory loss. Something lurking beneath the surface. If Grace's memories fully awaken, it could unravel time itself." And then, the final twist. A figure stepped out from the crowd, a man I thought was dead years ago. Someone I'd trusted with my life, who had vanished without a trace after my daughter was born. His eyes met mine, cold and unreadable. "I never left," he said simply. "Because this wasn't just about Grace. It was about you and the choice you'd have to make." The ground beneath us shifted once more as the world held its breath, waiting for what would come next. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The dawn broke slowly over the horizon, casting a pale light over the empty streets where the final confrontation had unfolded just hours before. Grace and I sat quietly in the back of an old pickup truck, the weight of everything that had happened settling over us like a thick fog. The world around us felt different, fractured, fragile, but for the first time since this nightmare began, there was a stillness that wasn't charged with fear or chaos. Lauren was gone, disappeared into the shadows she had once controlled, and the man who had returned from the dead to challenge my trust had vanished as mysteriously as he had appeared, leaving behind only questions. The devices that had threatened to erase Grace's memories lay shattered, a testament to the fierce resilience of a little girl who refused to be forgotten. But as I looked down at her, the way her eyes, wide and clear, searched mine, I realized that this wasn't a victory in the traditional sense. It was a truce with the unknown. We both understood now that memory wasn't something you could simply protect or erase without consequences. It was fluid, dangerous, and unpredictable. Grace's gift, or curse, was not just her ability to remember forgotten truths but to reshape the world by doing so. That power had drawn forces far beyond anything I had imagined. Forces that had woven themselves into the very fabric of governments, families, and forgotten programs designed to maintain order at any cost. And yet, the question remained, what was the cost of that order? How many lives had been altered, erased, or broken in the name of control? As I held Grace's hand, I understood that our fight was not against a single enemy but against the fear that keeps people from facing uncomfortable truths, the fear that memory can fracture reality, and that sometimes the only way forward is to embrace the cracks. We didn't have all the answers. The network behind the program was still out there, powerful and patient, waiting for the next fracture to exploit. But Grace and I had taken a stand, not just for ourselves, but for the fragments of truth scattered across forgotten lives. I promised her that no matter what came next, I would be her anchor, her home, the one constant she could hold on to when the world felt like it was slipping through her fingers. And in return, she gave me something I hadn't felt in months, a fragile, tentative hope. Because hope, like memory, is something you fight for. It's a choice. And sometimes it's all you have left. As we drove away from the town that didn't exist, leaving behind the echoes of battles fought and secrets unveiled, I glanced at Grace's reflection in the rearview mirror. For a moment, her eyes flickered, not with fear, but with the quiet strength of someone who carries worlds inside her. And then she whispered, "Daddy, do you think memories ever truly disappear?" I didn't answer. Because deep down I already knew the truth. Memories may fade, be rewritten, or hidden away, but they never truly vanish. They linger in the spaces between us, shaping who we are, who we become, and the stories we dare to tell. And sometimes they come back when you least expect them, reminding you that some mysteries are never meant to be fully solved. The road ahead was uncertain, the future unwritten, but one thing was clear. Grace and I were no longer just surviving a past rewritten. We were beginning to write our own story, one where truth, memory, and love could coexist, no matter how fractured the world around us might be. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this story made you think, feel, or question the very nature of memory and identity, please share your thoughts below. Because some mysteries don't end, they only invite us to look deeper. ***.